Hey guys, what's happening? So we are back with more Strange for part 9 of the 10-issue series. And at this point, not only do the stakes get risen much higher, but also we're finally given the answers to who's truly behind the Blasphemy Cartel, as well as what it is that they're really after. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so coming back from our last talk, where we had Pandora Peters, the former director of WAND, break down the history of Director Nunn and the Blasphemy Cartel, which at the time it only gave Wong, Clea, and Dr. Strange the answer to how the Blasphemy Cartel were able to get their hands on all these magical weapons, since they literally took it all from WAND, which was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s magical division, but a lot of other details remained a mystery since Director Nunn wiped his identity from everyone's memory, which has continued to keep his identity a secret, but it doesn't change the fact that Pandora Peters, the former director of WAND and the creator of the Blasphemy Cartel, still knows where their base of operations is located. So Clea and the Huntsman, Dr. Strange, make their way there to shut down the Blasphemy Cartel once and for all. Now that all the pieces have come together and they can finally attack rather than just react. And this now sets the stage for this fight to be the last one, because after the Blasphemy Cartel is defeated, Mistress Death's problem is solved. And I mean, well, this problem at least, because according to the agreement with Mistress Death, as soon as this threat is eliminated, Dr. Stephen Strange can return to the land of the living. And as they arrive at the Blasphemy Cartel's headquarters, which is codenamed Emerald City, we find that it's set up as a flying castle in the middle of an artificial storm, which looks a lot like what Doom had going on towards the end of Thor Volume 6, when he was doing the mind control in the artificial afterlife, but this is something entirely different. Oddly similar when you think about it, but this is different. And when they get there, Strange makes sure to remind Clea not to kill the soldiers of the Blasphemy Cartel, because they're all human. And he lets her know anything aside from that, revenants, demons, really anything else that's not human, have at it. So she begrudgingly agrees, even though it goes against who she is, but for as long as she's known Stephen, that's who he's been. And that hasn't even changed now, with Mistress Death arming him with a scythe, making him the harvestman, and giving him an overall task that you'd think would have went to some warrior or assassin, with Death assigning him to go after whoever was stealing these hundreds of millions and potentially billions of souls, because it causes Clea to think for a moment about how Stephen could have used the abilities that Death gave him to kill these guys easily, but he hasn't, because he is and always will be a doctor first. Because a doctor believes that all can be saved and abhors the death of others, whoever they might be. Because for Clea, with her being raised in the court of Dormammu, a place where cruelty was currency, sadism was strength, and viciousness was virtue. For Clea, in the beginning when she saw Strange go up against Dormammu and defeat him, and not even for the sake of despotism or dominance, but instead him just doing it to help others, it just reminds Clea that this is what caused her to fall in love with him so many years ago. So for Clea to see all these years later that still hasn't changed, it just reminds her why she feels the way that she does about him, in spite of their differences. And just after this, we see one of the agents make their way to Director Nunn to inform him about the attack and ask for further orders, while mind you, it's recently come to Director Nunn's attention that the Harvestman is Dr. Strange, so he's still processing that curveball as well. But he just ends up snapping on the poor guy, and he tells him, "You are all Bravo Charlie, the Blasphemy Cartel. Get out there and blasphemy." No, I'm playing, he ain't say that. But he tells them more or less to get out there and do what they're here to do, to buy some time, because he's getting ready to fire up Revenant Prime. So for a moment, this guy's just kind of like, Revenant Prime ain't ready. So Director Nunn just snaps on him, because as it stands right now, he doesn't have much of a choice. And now that he knows that the Harvestman is actually Dr. Strange, who's fighting alongside of Clea, the new Sorcerer Supreme, Revenant Prime is the only asset they have that can stop them. And you can very much tell that's the case, because they're just going through these demons next like it's nothing, while carrying on with their very casual conversation, because it's also supposed to be here where the big reveal is given as far as how Dr. Strange made Clea the Sorcerer Supreme, because they kind of go back and forth joking about the fact that Doom couldn't figure it out before, since Doom is always and only focused on Doom. But the way that Dr. Strange was able to pull this off and do it legit was by giving Clea a portion of his soul, which at this point for Dr. Strange has become more or less his signature move. So I imagine sooner or later Doom would have figured it out. But nonetheless, this whole idea of Strange giving a piece of his soul to Clea to make her the Sorcerer Supreme while he was gone It's brought up here to be like this big reveal, but I mentioned it quite some time ago, cause to me it just felt like this story was trying to save too many things for the very end, and I ain't like that. But while Clea and Strange are having their moment, Director Nunn comes in on the PA, and he tells Dr. Strange how his death was the worst thing that could have happened to the Blasphemy Cartel, because they had everything planned to a T as far as how they would continue with their plan and deal with Dr. Strange as the Sorcerer Supreme. But now that he's dead and come back as the Harvestman, alongside of Clea as the new Sorcerer Supreme, this gives Director Nunn two variables that he has to make adjustments for. And for us as the reader, this just shows us how Director Nunn really isn't the planning type, because all of these contingencies that he's talking about, they were created by Pandora Peters, the former director of WAND, so it's not like he's planned much of anything, even in the case of the Revenant program, which already existed, though on a smaller scale. So really all Director Nunn has been doing is just turning things up. Aside from that, he's just living up to his name. But it's also here where Clea asks Director Nunn, before she kills him, she needs to know, why? Why is he doing all this? What's the point of the Revenants? What does he intend to do with them? So of course Dr. Strange reminds Clea, no killing. But in response to Clea, Director Nunn lets her know if they make it past this next wave, he'll tell her everything. To where from there he releases all the Lazarus agents, who at this point are his last line of defense just before Revenant Prime. But among these 4 Revenants, these guys are really just beyond D-listers. Cause for example, one of them is Frank Payne, aka the Constrictor. He was a former agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. and he had like these adamantium whips or constrictor coils that he could charge up for an attack. But even in his case, it's not like a one-to-one thing, because after Frank died, his suit was passed down to his son. So instead of the Revenant getting adamantium constrictor coils, they're just magic based instead. But this time around for both Clea and Dr. Strange, though these are the toughest opponents that they've faced since arriving here, she's able to cut loose a bit more since Dr. Strange isn't concerned about these already dead Revenants dying again. So what they end up doing for most of these guys, it's the same method that they used on Shadow Knight a few issues back. So she just adapts it to each one of these guys, so they can finish them off one by one. But after Strange kills the 3rd Revenant, the 4th one impales him through the back with an attack that neither of them saw coming. But with how this is done, it's really just a gotcha moment, because for one, Dr. Strange is already dead, and then number 2, he really wasn't sure what to expect either. So by all means, this could have been the end of him again, which would then mean that he had failed Mistress Death by not fulfilling his end of the bargain. And speaking of fulfilling bargains, or more or less keeping one's word, it's here when the two of them approach Director Nunn, where he tells them all the little secrets that he's been keeping this whole series. Because as it turns out, after WAND fell apart, he found new management by way of voices who whispered to him in the darkness, voices who happened to be some old friends of Dr. Strange. And these voices were the Trinity of Ashes. Which for Dr. Strange, this goes back to the War of 7 Spheres, when he was drafted by the Vishanti, who are quite literally his upper management, who demanded that he would face their rivals in a conflict that would last 5,000 years. So of course, initially he was reluctant to do so, but the Vishanti didn't give him much of a choice. And in the War of the 7 Spheres, you had a number of higher powers facing off against each other in this huge predestined cycle of conflict, and it already had been determined that the Vishanti and the Trinity of Ashes would be assigned as opposing roles. But back at the time, after Dr. Strange fought for the Vishanti and defeated the Trinity of Ashes, the Vishanti erased Strange's memories of those 5,000 years as part of the agreement with the Trinity at the end of the war. But the Trinity of Ashes, they remember everything. And this is why now the Trinity of Ashes is using the Blasphemy Cartel to get their revenge on Dr. Strange. And in addition to that, they wanted the Blasphemy Cartel to provide them with a body that would allow them to walk the earth. So Director Nunn provided the body of Robert Reynolds, the Sentry. But as it stands right now, Director Nunn promises both Clea and Dr. Strange that they'll be dead long before that happens. Because as it stands right now, what we're looking at is Revenant Prime. So much like the other Revenants we've seen that have had about 1 million souls wrapped up into one person, they've more or less done the same process with the Sentry, but with 100 million souls, which now complicates this for both Clea and Dr. Strange exponentially. And right away, to herself, not out loud, but just to herself, Clea admits that she's afraid. Because when the Sentry was alive, he was practically a god walking amongst the living. And now this undead version of him, who still displays much of that power, he's like a god amongst demons, and he's on demon time. And I'm not even gonna dress it up as far as this matchup, or even try to make it sound like this was a fight from here, because Revenant Prime Sentry just walks the two of them, and there's nothing that they throw at him that even phases him in the slightest. So just imagine what type of power this would eventually become when the process is complete and the Trinity of Ashes are placed inside of this body. Because at that point, we're talking Vishanti level dark magic. And that's not even considering what the Trinity would do with the Void. We're only looking at one side of the coin here. But it's Revenant Prime Sentries just smacking the two of these guys around, literally. Because again, there's no intellect going on here. It's just 100 million insane souls wreaking havoc. Director Nunn is surprised and a bit afraid himself, because he didn't even know that Revenant Prime Sentry would be this powerful, even at this stage. And aside from his sheer power, he is just moving too fast for either Strange or Clea to properly cast a spell. So once again, it's just not looking good for these guys, because at this point, if Doctor Strange wasn't dead already, woo! This would have done it. Because it even gets to the point to where this remade body that Death has given him, it's not going to hold up much longer, because he's a few hits away from getting sent right back to her. But before Strange and Clea are just completely finished, Director Nunn takes a moment to point out how the Strange that lays here before him is nothing like the Strange that the Trinity of Ashes spoke of, the Doctor Strange that they were terrified of because of what he became during the War of Seven Spheres. And for Strange, with him knowing that it's pretty much a wrap, he just looks at Clea and tells her to get out of there. But she doesn't leave, and instead she just crawls over to him while telling him, live or die, we do it together. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.